So in this video I'm going to show you how I made this lathe stand. I'm going to put drawers and a door on it later, but if you're interested in seeing how I made this, keep watching. The manufacturers of mini lathes offer a very nice stand with their lathes, but I wanted one exactly the way I wanted it, with storage space, with drawers and a cabinet. That video will be out next week as I finish it up. And the requirements I was looking for was something strong, sturdy, rigid, something that would hold up, something that would look fairly nice, and something that reasonably priced and mobile. And I think I have all that in this mini lathe stand. So hi y'all, I'm Mike Peace, Woodturning, and I'm here to share with you tips, tricks, and techniques to help you become a better woodturner. So if that's something you're interested in, you know the drill, click and subscribe. You know, I did a lot of research on lathe stands before I made this thing. Many of them that I saw were by beginning woodturners that might not appreciate how rigid it needed to be or strong enough, so they were underbuilt. Some of them were built by I'd say engineers that wanted to over-engineer it, made them way too heavy duty, and I wanted a Goldilocks solution, one that's just right, and I think that's what I've got in this lathe stand right here. Some of the things I did on this one, I'm not sure I recommend to everybody else, but I wanted to do it. I had this nice maple top. If I were making one from scratch, didn't have this, I'd of course double up with some Baltic birch 3/4 inch and make it the same 1.5 inch. I've trimmed out all the other cabinets in my shop with cherry, so I thought I would do the same thing on this one. I had lots of thin cherry scraps that weren't good for much of anything else, so it wasn't a big effort, but it's something that not everybody would necessarily be interested in. Let's see. Don't laugh. Okay, now I've got something I think I can saw along here once I mark it. I know many of y'all are far more skilled woodworkers than I am. I got into turning pretty early before I got very far into general woodworking. I have made a few items in my shop, as shown in these pictures here. But what I would suggest when you're breaking down a big sheet of sheet goods, take your diagram that you've drawn, whether it's hand-drawn or software, and put it on your a scaled model of your sheet of plywood, whether it's 4x8 or in my case 5x5, to figure out how's the best way to orient your pieces to get maximum out of the wood. So this is basically the main pieces for the frame. For joinery, I did everything in Kreg pocket screws. They hold very, very tight. You know, I'm sorry I never mastered any design software, so I can't say that I can make available a really detailed set of plans. But I did have, you know, in my design efforts, I did put something on paper. So I will put a link to that resource on my website. I did it in Excel, so it's a little rough around the edges. And of course, everybody's lathe stand and specs are going to be a little bit different. Some people might want it a little bit taller. Some people might want it a little narrower. Some people might want it bigger if they've got a lathe with a bed extension. So, you know, I don't know that I'd follow my design exactly, but here I'm going to have two sets, four drawers actually. I'm going to have a little small drawer here, little small drawer here, a larger drawer here, and then this is going to be a drop front cabinet door. If I was doing this from scratch, I'd probably just use a sheet of plywood for this cabinet door, but turns out, you know, I kind of like shaker style. Looks nice. I had, like I say, some cherry scraps, so I made a shaker. I'm going to make a shaker style. You'll see that later. And of course, I'm going to turn a bunch of knobs for it. I get tickled when I see woodturners making a lathe stand with drawers on it, and then they go out and buy hardware. Let's talk about plywood, since it varies considerably. I've got three pieces of cabinet quality plywood. The best is this Baltic birch, 13 plies, all Baltic birch. It has no voids, it has no crossovers or double stacking any of the layers. Very high quality, 13 ply. Actually, I think it's 11 core plies and then a very thin veneer on each side. The cheaper cabinet ply, in this case, this looks pretty good. It's got 7 plies if you count the super thin layer on each outside of veneer, and really 5 cores. The cores tend to be poplar, whereas this is all Baltic birch. This is a cabinet, an old piece of cabinet grade I had on hand, and again, it's 13 ply, somewhat similar to the Baltic birch, except the plies tend to be softer woods like poplar or possibly even pine. And you tend to have things like these voids, or I don't know if you can see this detail here, an overlapping. So it does make a difference. I would say probably if you're making a Midi stand somewhat similar to mine, you'd probably be better off with a 4x8 sheet of plywood. I had a few fairly high quality scraps, not Baltic birch, but good grade cabinet wood. So I'm using parts of the lathe stand from those scraps as shown here. Rule of thumb about lathe height: your lathe, the center of the spindle ought to be about your elbow height. So for me that was about 44-45 inches. So do the math. Okay, this 5x5 sheet of Baltic birch is one honking big piece of plywood. So I've got to break it down with at least one cut before I can maneuver it on my table saw. So I'm going to get this up on my table saw, cut it with a saber saw, a jigsaw, and then we'll go from there. Like I've said so many times in the past, this is not the only way. It may not be the right way, but it's the way that worked for me. I had to cut an angle on the side panels because the tops of my stand are 15 inches. The bottom of the stand are 17.5 inches. So the way I did that was drawing it on the panel and then measuring that angle or setting up my miter gauge to get that same effect, and these mirror each other. I left a little extra room on this side so I could true it up to the exact length, but that way I flip this over and I've got both of them with 15 at the top and 17.5 at the bottom after I cut about 1 inch off of this one. I now have all the pieces cut out for the carcass. So the next step is going to be preparing the top. For most of y'all, your best bet for the top would be to use 2 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood glued together. In my case, I had some very nice maple that was didn't have any other purpose to it. That had been laminated, so I needed to join it and glue it. And after joining it, I glued up the top 2 panels. When it comes to certain structural aspects, you've got a choice of possibly doubling up on a quality plywood or using softer pine 2x4. Depending on what you're using, maybe the 2x4 is good enough. For most of the structural cross pieces and beams, I want to use a doubled up piece of Baltic birch or a high quality cabinet grade, which you got to glue together and you got to trim to make it square, so it is a little extra work, but I plan on using this lathe stand for a long time, so I want to make it as high quality as I can. So we start the assembly process with the bottom brace on the side. We're going to simply mount that with 3 screws. I've already set the screw depth, so I know when I hit here it'll stop. So we're going to go ahead and pre-drill these. I call this a recess tool so that it will sit flush. And on to the next one. All our joinery is going to be done using what they call pocket screws. This video can't possibly cover this in detail. I'm not going to try. I just want to give a brief introduction for those of y'all might not be familiar with it. Basically, it calls for using a jig to use a special drill to drill a hole in sideways. Then you use a screw with a flat shoulder. They can have different appearances to them, and it comes in like this, and then joins the piece of wood like this. It's very, very strong. I'll have links in my Amazon shop for some of these. They come in different manufacturers. Kreg is the most popular, but there are other knockoffs, if you will. Kreg has a very nice clamp for clamping this single one down, but they've got fancier models that'll do 2 holes, 3 holes, some of them that automate it almost and use your feet, but this is a very inexpensive jig if you're not going to be using it a great deal. This clamp, I think Kreg sells one for about $20. I got this one for Harbor Freight for much, much less than that. I think it may be a welding clamp, but it's got two large pads on it. I made this little jig to set the depth of the stop because the holes that you drill vary based on whether you're using a 1/2 inch wood, 3/4 inch wood, or 1.5 inch, and where you position the jig makes a difference based on the size wood. For 3/4 inch, you get it flush, and all the screws just about have Robertson screws. They're a square head, so you need to have a long extension in order to get in tight to tighten this up. You can make the joints tighter with glue, but I think if you use enough pocket screws, it's going to be so strong that the glue is not necessary. And if you decide to redesign something or to retrofit it, it's a whole lot easier if you can just take the screws loose than if you have to start over by breaking the pieces apart that get glued and almost destroy it if you do have to make any changes. Oh, one other thing, one little tip: use a dry lubricant on your drill bit about every 20 holes. It'll reduce the friction and make it last a little bit longer. So I proceed to drill all the pocket holes. Stop and clear some of the chip. This stops the depth of the drill. And okay, it's beginning to shape up now with a cross brace, and you don't have to have these big clamps, but I find for me it helps to square it up, but having a jig of some sort probably wouldn't hurt either. Make it even. Probably shouldn't be using my battery as a hammer. Trick is the right amount of pressure. Okay. It's a little easier. Okay. Just a couple of tricks for assembly. Paraffin on your screws sure makes it a lot easier. Also, use clamps for little support blocks to when you get this even and you're fixing to drill for any number of places. Okay, we flipped it over. We're about to mount the 1.5 inch maple base, or if you're making one, I'd use 2 sheets of 3/4 inch Baltic birch. I've used these little feeler gauges I've got for 1/4 inch. I want a little 1/4 inch here for appearance, 1/4 inch on the back. And I've got an 1.5 inch overhang in the front. So we're going to go ahead and fasten this down. It's important that you take care of this mounting the top from the underside now, because I'm going to put in 2 shelves and a vertical divider here. If I don't take care of this now, I won't be able to get to it. Also, all these screws have got to be recessed slightly because I'm going to have drawers coming in, and there's only going to be a 1/16 of an inch tolerance at the top and the bottom. While we've got it upside down, I'm going to go ahead and add these plates to the bottom. I made these out of 2x4s. I didn't feel like they needed the same strength here because all this is going to be resting on it. And this is to give a little wider surface than I have here for these casters. I'm mounting it on the inside like this, flush with the edge. I also did a little round over on the sander, just so I don't have any sharp edges to bump against. So I've got it flush here. I want it leaning out on the outside, not on the inside, because I want to have as much foot room on the inside of the cabinet as possible. And we'll mount that right in the center with locking casters. And I'm going to be using 2.5 inch screws, so that'll go in this Baltic birch about 1 inch. I don't believe I've got to worry too much about it coming loose because the whole weight of the cabinet is going to be resting on this, so it's not going to be able to go anywhere. I'm going to be later fastening these with lag bolts. Unfortunately, these are too large. I've got to get some just a little bit smaller. Okay, well, I'm still on the floor and I've got full access to the cabinet. I'm going to go ahead and put these runners in for the top drawer. I cut these out of 4 of them out of oak. I've pre-drilled them. I'm going to use these 1.25 inch nails. I've done a spacer. The drawers are going to be 2 inches. The spacer is 2 1/8 inch. That gives me a 1/16 of an inch on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to lay this in. I don't want it to quite touch. I've got to allow a little allowance at the back for the back. Okay, and I'll take care of the rest of it and be back at you. When you've been sitting on the floor a while, you realize a nice job aid is a little short stool, so I went and got that. I'm doing the upright now. It's got pocket screws on both sides going into these cross braces. I cut a little measuring stick because I want these to be exactly the same width, so the drawers would be interchangeable when I make them. So it's always useful to cut a little jig. Trust me, take my word for it. It's always easier to make a little jig to help square things up or size things right, especially if you're doing it multiple times. Okay, that's done. Alright, now I'm going to put in the shelf unit. Now that I got the center to hold it. Again, remembering what I said about a jig, I cut another little scrap that I had to help brace it on one side so it'll be exactly 6 inches across. Alright, time to put the back on. I find that this task gives a lot of satisfaction because it kind of brings closure to the main carcass. I've already drilled all the holes on both sides, so I fit it in. And the woodworker says you can't have too many clamps. And that'll hold on that side. Now all I gotta do is walk around and get the drill. If you're ever in the market for woodworking clamps, man, I can't recommend these jets enough. I've had these for probably 15 years when I first got interested in woodworking, and what I love about them, they'll stand up square, they'll lay on their back, they got a quick release clamp, they got measurements on the side, but one of the nicest features I really like about it, and you don't think about it much, is boy, these got beefy handles. When the Bessies and the Jorgensens had these wooden ones, they were a lot harder to turn. Well, making this lathe stand has been a lot of fun. It also reminds me of why I got into wood turning, because that instant gratification, because this kind of project does take a while, but it has been a lot of fun. I'll have a link here when I finish the next video where I get into the drawers, the door. I'll put a coat of polyurethane on it, and I'll be mounting the my new Laguna. So if you're interested, after I do that video, click here. Y'all stay safe. Come on back here.